Hello, how are we? Woohoo. How many writers in the room? How many of you have final draft? Okay, good. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 keys to final draft. One of them is going to go to a Capilano College student, or Capilano U, pardon me. It's Capilano University. Where are you? Okay, in order to win these, your job is to hashtag VIFF industry and also put in final draft. One of them will go to somebody from Cap U. The rest will go to the other people who put in. What are they putting in? Final draft, VIFF industry. Sound good? Easy? Thank you very kindly.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Writer's Room. My name is Simon Barry. I'm the showrunner on Continuum. Well, actually, I'm the unemployed showrunner on Continuum now. And with me today, starting from my left, is Jennica Harper, who writes on Motive and who previously wrote on Some Assembly Required and Mr. Young. Next to her is Racher Langer. Hi, Rachel. Rachel was an intern in the Continuum room, but she's also a writer now on a show called Reboot. She was on Olympus and also This Life. And next to her is Raul Inglis. Raul recently worked on a series called Insomnia, also worked on Continuum, and actually before that worked on the original Reboot. So you're a reboot and you're the reboot of Reboot. So we'll get that straight. So I'd just like to welcome them, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. So before we get started here, I just thought a little context would be a good idea because the topic today is Inside the Writer's Room, but unless you really have an understanding of what the Writer's Room is and how it functions, a lot of what these guys are going to talk about today may not be as informative. So I'm just going to do a really quick 101 notes version on what a Writer's Room is, for those who don't know. So when a TV series either gets ordered or renewed, the first order of business is setting up a writer's room. It usually involves the head writer, which is sometimes the showrunner, but sometimes it's not, and then a team of writers that basically go from a senior level to a junior level to a writer's assistant, script coordinator. And that can be anywhere from 4 to 7 people, depending on the budget of the show and how many episodes are being made. The first order of business in that room is usually figuring out what the hell the show season is going to be, which involves a lot of people talking and notes being taken by the script coordinator and assistant. At that point, those notes are essentially transferred into cards, and those cards become the spine of the episodes that need to be written. Then scripts are assigned to the writers in the room, and then those writers are basically told to go and write, and everyone goes away, and the writing begins, and then people come back. And we read the scripts, and we make notes, and the studio, the network reads the scripts, and they give notes, and the scripts evolve towards production. Now, inherent in this politics of the room, because writers aren't just there to share ideas, they're not just there to participate, they're also competing for scripts, because you're getting paid to be in the room, but the real money and the real value of being a writer is actually getting a script ordered, and you are the one who gets your name on it, and you get the production fee. And so inherent in the room's dynamic, inherent in that structure, is a built-in competitive spirit, which is for every writer in there, no matter where they are in the tier, they want to write as many scripts as possible in the season. So that's an important thing to understand, I think, because I think a lot of what these guys are going to bring to the table today is the understanding of not only how you get in the room, but also once you're in that room, how you negotiate to get the most writing opportunities and to get the most credits, which is really, at the end of the day, the point. And also to move up the chain of command, because traditionally, the more senior you are as a writer, the more scripts you get to write, which means you make more money. So I'm going to start with...
it's all about greed, is what you're saying.
Well...
TV writing's greed.
Yeah, there's a component of television that is greed, yes. You have to sell ads and sell subscriptions, right? So I'm going to start with, we'll start with you, Raul, and we'll move back. I just want to get a quick breaking in story, because I think a lot of people who are writers here want to know, there is no rule to how to get into a writer's room. I can't give you a guidebook, but I think you can glean through personal anecdotes sort of the various ways getting into a writer's room may happen. So if you want to start, just a quick story about how you broke in.
It's really, I think being a writer is really about networking. And writing your ass off. I just wrote and wrote and wrote. Like through my 20s, all I did was write. And then I just got a lucky break writing a film. So I moved into the film world, and I was writing films for people and rewriting films for people. And then through connections there, somebody said, hey, we're doing, looking for a writer for Reboot. And then I got onto that show just simply because I knew people and they knew me as a writer. And then how I got into, and then from there I did a bunch of other animated shows. I did Dragon Booster, fucking winner there. And another League of Super Evil, another animated show, because I was in that whole world of you're in cartoon. You're a cartoon writer. You can write all these other things, not knowing who I am. And then I moved on to knowing Simon. I got into Continuum because they needed a space came up, and then I moved on to that show, and then I moved on to Insomnia because I'd worked with the producer when I was a screenwriter. I was working with him then, so just suddenly an opportunity arose. And that's how I got into the whole world.
Rachel?
After film school, I was just doing everything I could to meet anybody that I could meet in television while I was writing. And I had been I'd been working for TVA, which is an online Canadian television review site, and just doing some reviews, and I got the chance to interview Simon. And I had been sending out emails asking if anyone needed a coffee maker in their room that was human instead of electric, and just kept getting no's and thank you and no and thank you. And I got this, I'd gotten so close, they're like, I'd gotten a show that said maybe, and I was like, that's a maybe. So I, held on to that, and then they were like, no. So then I was like, okay, fine. Who else do I know, and who do I really want to work for? And I emailed Simon on a whim and said, hey, if you do need a coffee maker and a lunch getter and a note taker, I can do all those things. And he wrote me back and said, how about, can you do them in 4 days? Can we start in 4 days? And I was like, yes, absolutely. So I did that, and that was a really valuable experience, just learning, being quiet and learning how the room worked around you. And then I went to the Canadian Film Centre and did their primetime program, and that's how I met Michael McLennan, who hired me onto This Life, and then carried on to that with Joseph Kay, who's the showrunner now. So that was kind of the genesis for me.
And
Right.
Jennica?
I fresh out of school I did manage to get an assistant job on a CBC show years ago, and that was through a showrunner had been a guest speaker in the program, and I had sort of said, "Can I take you out for coffee?" And she sort of they had an opening, and so I did go to be an assistant for a while. But then that didn't seem to lead to anything for a while. So I did spend a number of years doing other things and rewriting some features that never got made. So that probably doesn't speak that well toward me. But I spent many years writing new TV samples. So while I was piecing together a living, I was working on pilots and spec episodes of TV all that time, and getting interviewed to be a script coordinator, the junior person in the room for many years, and not quite getting the job, getting close and not quite getting it. And then for me, the big change was I applied for and received a fellowship. At the time, I believe it was called the Banff Global Apprenticeship, Banff Global Writers Apprenticeship. It's a bit of a word salad, like 4 of those words go in some order. I'm not sure what order. But it's a really great award. You get to go to the Banff TV Festival in June, like all expenses paid, which is a very expensive proposition if you're a new writer trying to just get out there. And that was wonderful, met a ton of people there. But the award also comes with, at the time it was a 1-month internship on a show. So they actually placed me into a writing room, and it was at an internship level, and so it was for about a month. And my job at that point was, okay, I need to convince them that I I belong here and that I'll be really cheap and that I'll be worth having. And you got to keep me. I can be useful. And so I threw myself at that month, and then they ended up keeping me on for the rest of the season. So that was my sort of door in. And it's the reason why I always say anytime you have a chance to apply for something, go for it. That particular year, I didn't quite meet the qualifications for that award. And the 6 of us were chosen, and half of us did not quite meet the qualifications, but we applied anyway. And it was a great lesson to me in, you know, if you're close, go for it, because you never know who your competition is. They might be, you might be the top of the heap that year, and so it's worth going for. You know, sort of, I don't know. It's that sort of go for it and apologize later if it's a problem, but it's often not a problem. People are just looking for people who are committed, and that was the case that year.
Great. Okay. Now, I think all of you probably, and I think everyone out here has an assumption about what the writing room is like. It's a term you hear a lot. You hear it thrown around in the business a lot. I'd been a professional writer for 15 years before I'd ever stepped in a writing room. So I had built up in my mind all of these ideas about what it was and how it worked. And of course, those were all, I had to reevaluate all those things once I finally went in. I just wondered if you could each discuss what was the biggest surprise between what you expected the writer's room would be like and to what it actually is like that kind of threw you for a loop. And anyone can answer.
Well, for me, it was one of the greatest things, like having written a lot of movies, was that you have to solve the problems yourself. You get a distributor telling you one thing, you get the director telling you one thing, the producer telling you one thing, and then you have an actor who's got his own sort of idea, and you're trying to solve everyone's problems, and you're just doing it by yourself. And then with the writer's room, suddenly you had a team that you could work with. So it wasn't just, the burden was just on you, and I love that aspect of being with a group of people that hopefully are like-minded and hopefully you can gel with. Though the one aspect I wasn't prepared for was the politics in the room, as Simon said. So that, yeah, you could be like, oh, Rachel and I are having a great time here, but Jennica, Jesus, every time she opens her mouth, she keeps squashing one of my ideas, and then she keeps stealing Rachel's ideas. So you're going like, what the hell is wrong with her? But she's got this great relationship with Simon, and then I'm the one who looks like a loser. So there's that aspect I wasn't really prepared for. So I'll stop there before I start naming names.
That is true. I do steal Rachel's ideas. They're not even good. I don't care. You did the work. It's fine. I think. I mean, the collaborative part is the most amazing part of the job, I think, and it's not for everybody. So, it truly is super collaborative. So if you know in your heart you don't like other people that much, maybe you want to stick to features. But I knew that I would love the collaborative part, but what I didn't know was that I kind of worried going in that I would be really protective of my ideas and really hurt that my ideas weren't the ones taken. And as it turns out, I think for most of us who enjoy the room and fit in a group as opposed to sort of alone, you are so grateful that 6 smart, you have 6 brains thinking about it with you. You're so happy to take the better idea from someone else and be like, my name's going to be on that. That's great. Thank you so much. You get to the point where you become kind of almost hooked on it. It's sort of like, well, I'm working on something in my office, a solution to a problem. I'm not sure. So I'm going to go in and visit somebody else's office and talk out with 3 people. Does this work? Does this work? Help me. And you get kind of hooked on that. And so that surprised me, that it's very easy to let go of your possessiveness about your ideas. And it's very healthy, I think.
It's also interesting because you really have to learn what your skill set is in the room. And I think that's what I can't speak highly enough for being an assistant or being a coordinator for your first couple times. And I had done a stint on a variety show room before Continuum, and so I got a sense of what it's like to work and I wasn't supposed to talk, and it was great because I could just listen to them and watch how that flow worked. And then going into Continuum, learning who was the person who protected the characters and who was the person who always had an idea and who was the person who dealt with the plot flaws and dealt with the, oh, we actually did that in this episode, 2 seasons ago. And you learn where your skill set is, and you have to just really sit there and be comfortable there, because that's, what you're designed to do, and that's why there is a collaborative nature. So it takes a while to figure that out, and 80% of the time you're sitting there going, what am I doing here? But then when you find it, and when somebody else says, oh, okay, I see, that's where you fit in this room, it's a really, really magical feeling too.
Yeah, if you can strip away that ego, then that works really well. The whole machine, works as good as it can be.
Now, along those lines, having now started working in the writer's room and kind of getting over this anxiety about it and discovering that there are all these benefits, you hear all the time these anecdotal stories about things that go horribly wrong and situations. I mean, I think you were on Shattered, right, which had 6 showrunners in one season, and you were on Olympus, where they fired everyone in the room. And so I just thought, as much as
we survived.
You survived. As much as you can go in and go, this is going to be an awesome experience, things do go horribly wrong. And I just thought, I think that war stories are great, because as writers, we don't get to communicate with each other a lot in terms of sharing experiences unless we're working together. But there are always lessons to be learned from war stories that you can hopefully you never run into that situation yourself, but if you do, you can say, well, whatever Jennica did to survive that, I'm going to try that too. So I just thought you guys could share some war stories, because you all have very unique situations, and actually right now you're on a very stable show, Motive, which you've come into as a new writer. So you didn't start with the show. They're in their 4th season of writing. You're a new person in the room, but you're an experienced writer. You were on Olympus, which was a notoriously hard show, I heard, from a writer's perspective, because there was all this contentiousness. And Raul, you're now just finishing the show Insomnia, which very unusually had no showrunner at all. It was just a bunch of writers left in a room to figure out the show without a leader. So I think you all have war stories to share, and I just thought maybe you could, if there's one story in particular, too, that you think illustrates some of the pitfalls that some of these guys may encounter down the road, it might be just fun to elaborate. And if you don't want to name names, that's fine. I'll do that. I'll be the bad guy. I'll name Dennis Heaton. Dennis Heaton. Dennis Heaton
is my current boss, and a fabulous, fabulous guy. And actually, he's awesome. He's kind of terrifying. Like, he has that kind of homicidal maniac kind of vibe, and he wanted me to let you know that if I spoke out of turn, he would kill me in my sleep. But it is a really well-run room, and it's such a pleasure, actually, to sort of slip into this machine that functions, and it's wonderful. We're actually, you know what, I'm not going to say anything. I'm calling a shutout here.
War stories.
Yes, war stories. Anyway, Motive's great. You mentioned Shattered. So Shattered was the show that I worked on, that was that internship that I then parlayed into the full season job. And so I was the junior person in that writing room. I was the story editor in that room. And it was really, really difficult. We did go through 6 showrunners in one. So, showrunner is like the head writer / producer who is really steering the ship. And in this case, none of the showrunners really were ever given the ability to steer the ship, and that was part of the problem. It was very political from a producer working with network kind of environment. And so there was very high-level politics going on. As the junior person in the room, I had nothing to do with those. I was not sitting in on calls, getting notes, hearing the crazy, miscommunications. I was not part of that at all. I was part of the writing team that, because the environment was so political and became kind of toxic and kind of scary, people were not sure if they were going to be fired, that kind of thing. The writing room fractured into 2. And what really happened was there were sort of 2 different factions happening, and they weren't really even talking to each other by the end. And so it was not great for a first writing room experience, although it was a great war story and a great lesson. I learned so many things. But I think the thing that I learned most and fared best for me was that I really felt like my job was not to even fix anything. I didn't know how to do that. All I felt like I could do was support the other writers. And so what I tried to do was be nonpartisan, and completely support any writer at any stage that they were. So if they needed somebody to bounce something off of, I would be that person. If they needed fresh eyes on a script, I would be that person. I tried to be positive, and I tried to support everybody along the way. And I think I'm the only one that actually has relationships with all of those people on both sides now. So as the junior person, I felt like that was my only choice. It would be crazy to, your first, networking with 5 other people and you're going to alienate half of them. That was not my plan. So I really tried to be supportive on both sides, and that really helped me. And I think that's even in a regular writing room, that's probably a good way to go when you're the last person in, is to be as helpful and supportive and positive with other people as you can, because any one of those people may then go off and they get their show. And from a human level, it's great too. Obviously, we need to contribute in a good way rather than adding to the toxicity. But even in a really self-serving way, any one of those people could go off and create their show. And you want to be someone that they think of in a good way rather than in a negative way.
So before we move on to Rachel, was there an opportunity for you at that point to even put yourself in the shoes of the more senior writers who were being asked to take sides? Could you understand the mentality of what they were going through that forced them into these camps? Or was it just a personal thing where you were completely at a loss as to why this was?
I don't think I understood at the time, because at the time it was, from my perspective, my weekly wage was like the Kleenex budget for the show. Like, it was so low. I was really struggling, and I was still really happy to be there. And I did get a script, which was amazing, so that helped a lot. But at the time, I was thinking, these guys are so senior. Like, they seemed so comfortable in their careers. And I kind of thought, how bad could it be? Like, just suck it up. It's okay. Like, but what you don't realize is at every stage of your career, the same sort of pressures emotionally and politically, you feel it. Like, yes, obviously, if you get paid well, of course, every day you're like, well, it beats digging ditches. Of course it does. But you can't help that day you're going to be miserable, because someone else is going to make you feel terrible about your work, is going to make you feel in fear for your job. It's, as an industry, it's insecure anyway. You're lucky if you have the 7 months planned, let alone next year. You don't know. So you do get protective of keeping that job. You do start to feel like you might be battling with someone else for maybe they'll fire him instead of me.
That's a great point. I mean, that insecurity of the business seeps into the room in ways
it fosters. You can't help take on. At the time, in a way, what I didn't know was I had the least to lose. In a way, I didn't have a mortgage and a family to feed at the time and things like that, and some of them did. So I think I can understand their shoes much better now, because I could imagine being in that situation now, going to work every day, kind of miserable because you don't know if the person you're writing your script for is going to be fired that day. You don't know if you're going to be fired that day. That is a terrible way for anybody to work, and I really feel for them more now, I think.
So let's talk to Rachel, who actually did get fired, along with every other writer in the room.
In fact, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
I left
Congratulations.
before the
Yes.
firing.
Good lesson. Always leave on top. Don't wait around to get fired.
I was fortunate because This Life started up, and I left to take some writing on that. And I was a writer's assistant on Olympus, so it was kind of a strategic move up for me. So I kind of left and then looked back and said, oh, okay.
And I'm going to let you off the hook a little bit, because I know that the showrunner on Olympus was trying to probably overmanage the amount of work that was required, was trying to control too many things. And I think as someone who hadn't probably run a show before, that particular showrunner didn't realize that you can't do that, that's impossible.
Yeah.
If you were to sort of step outside what your role was in the room at the time, were there conversations within the room that were predicting what was going to happen, to the point where everyone kind of understood the solution, but no one could actually implement the solution?
I think so. I mean, they actually had 2 leads on that show, and one was the showrunner who had created the show, and one was a very experienced showrunner who had run other shows, and they were both incredibly hardworking guys who had complete opposite methods of running a room. And the one showrunner was traveling a lot, and the other one was there the whole time, and so it was just a difficult kind of like back and forth. So we would get a whole bunch done one day, and then the dynamic would change the next day when we were all there, and everything we'd done had to kind of be redone. And, you know, it happens a lot when you have a busy showrunner who can't be there. I mean, that's a very common thing in a room, to have a showrunner who has to leave and deal with other parts of their show, and you have to forge ahead and then hope that you're forging ahead in the vein of the vision that they have for the show. And then sometimes they come back and say, yes, this is perfect, this is right on. And sometimes they come back and say, oh, that's cute, no, we're not gonna go with that. So, you know, you really have to kind of be prepared for that. But it just felt like the work that was getting done just constantly kept getting brought back. And you could see the frustration in the room, because everybody was working really hard and really cared about the show. And I think the problem was that everybody cared about the show, and everybody had a different idea of how to care about the show and make it work. And it was just predictive in the way that, you know, things kept getting shut down. You're like, okay, this is eventually going to come to a head. I just don't know what's going to happen when it does. So.
And Raul, you're not allowed to talk about Continuum war stories because I'm here. So you have to talk about your other shows.
Damn. Yeah, no, Insomnia, as Simon said, there was no showrunner. It was a situation where the three of us were hired, and we were given 2 weeks to break. At the time, 12 episodes. So, which is, you know, we had to work, you know, basically.
That's a ridiculously short amount of time.
Yeah, ridiculously short amount of time.
By standards of,
Yes.
normally you would have 4 weeks to break stories, then another 4 weeks to start carding, and then another 4 weeks to write. Yeah.
Exactly. So and the lucky thing was that all three of us had the same sort of film experience, and we'd all been in the trenches together, and we all sort of saw eye to eye in what the show would be. So there wasn't any conflict there. However, there was a slight bit of the, you know, political pulling, as we talked about. Like I specifically lobbied the executive producers for the first episode, saying like, I want that showmanship of the pilot, and I managed to, you know, Machiavellian ways get the other writers to agree on that, whereas one of the other writers, which I won't name a name, but he managed to get the last episode because he wanted to, the other guy got kind of screwed in the middle. But then suddenly, as we're breaking the show, we're going, we have 12 episodes, we're going to do this. We needed basically an episode and a quarter done a day, sort of. Suddenly, by the first week, they go, oh, it has to be 8. We don't have enough money for 12. So suddenly, we've already done the big broad strokes of like, this is going to go here and this is going to end here, and suddenly we had to crunch episodes together, throw plots out, and go into damage control, and then work on a weekend that we didn't think we'd be working on, just to make it work, and then just constantly, because there's no leader in the room, I maybe foolishly took, I tried to make myself the leader, again, in a Machiavellian way. So I'd be the one coordinating all the calls of the executive producers, but that also meant that I would get calls late at night. I would be about to see a play. It's 5 minutes to 8. I'm about to go see a play, and I get a call like, oh, we want to talk about this scene. And I'm going, oh, man, I gotta. And so when I would try to have a life, then they suddenly would come back to my agent saying, he's ignoring our calls. He's not one of the, he's not a team player. And I'm going like, dude, I was at a play. I had to pick up my kid from school. I mean, I'm doing everything else and working my ass off for you guys. So it kind of painted me in a picture, I think, with them that I wasn't really cut out for them in a way. So the guy got the last episodes, he kind of got groomed at the end, sort of being, oh, we'll listen to him and he can coordinate the calls. So I'm going, damn it, I got screwed.
He
on this.
answers his phone so he can be in charge.
He answers, well, yeah, but after I had the 2 weeks of not answering, well, I mean, I answered and I could. And then also because I had the first episode, the problems were that everyone's setting the tone, which is what the guy who wrote the last episode knew would happen. I had to rewrite that thing over and over and over again as they would go, oh, yeah, we don't like that. I said, but you approved that. Yeah, but we needed to see how it would work before we could say no to it. So, I go, well, I just wrote an entire screenplay. Now I'm going to read a page 1 rewrite again. So that was a horror story there. But, and then we don't know how the show, then they sort of, unlike other TV shows, they wrote us off after we had done our work. They didn't want our input during casting. They didn't want our input during production. So they shot in Moscow, the series, but none of the writers could go. They cast in Toronto. They didn't want to hear from us. Didn't even answer emails from us. So suddenly we were, I was treated again like I was a screenwriter, which is,
You got ghosted.
yeah. So and then so we don't know how it's going to work and whether we're going to come back and have more jobs or
You brought up a good point though about sort of the battle for scripts, and I think everyone here can relate to that in terms of you go into the room. Now, at some point in your career, when you've had a few, when your resume is built, you get to negotiate going into a room the number of scripts you are guaranteed. Now, whether you write that number of scripts or not, they still have to pay you that number. So, as an experienced writer going into a room, you can say, I'll come and be part of this writer's room, but I need 1 script guaranteed, or 2 scripts guaranteed, or 3 scripts is probably the max. And that's something you can negotiate in advance with your agent. But when you're a young writer, you don't get to do that negotiation walking in, and you have to fight for that script once you're in the room. And I think you guys probably have great perspective on what you have learned, or what the stories you have about sort of maneuvering, once you're in the room, that opportunity. Because there are some writers, like Raul, who will just push you aside and grab it, clearly, and won't care that they're taking, food off your plate. But obviously, there is a awareness of that. You come into this situation, you're happy to have the job, but what you really want to have is a screenplay credit, a teleplay credit, and you want to have more than one if possible. Can you just talk a little about not just your perception of that goal, but also how that can go wrong, it can go sideways, or when it can go right?
I think it's really important to know what your level is going into a room, and that's part of having a great agent who can say, you're the junior, so like expect to be treated like the junior, and or there's somebody else that is the junior, and here's where you fit, and that's the showrunner's perception of you going in. Because I'm still at the point where I'm just happy to be getting a script in a show. I had 3 co-writes on This Life, and then Reboot is my first full script, and now.
But you didn't know going into Reboot that you were going to be guaranteed a script, or you did?
I had 1 guaranteed.
You had 1 guaranteed, okay.
And then 26, yeah. So, and then when I went into the room, usually like writers are pretty closed about discussing their contracts and what's guaranteed, and they might talk, if you're having a drink with one of them later, they might tell you, but they're not going to discuss it in the room. In Reboot, they did, and so I kind of found out what everybody else's guarantees were, but I knew I was the junior.
You must have also known then how many were available, because if you add up what's guaranteed,
and I literally
the
thought
remainder
about
is,
that every day, and thought, is another one of these gonna be mine? And but I also, I wanted to go into that room expecting to get the 1 and then hoping I could earn another, just through merit. I didn't want to ask for 1. I just wanted to see if I could work and, turn in a draft that didn't get me fired for 1, and did also maybe got me another script, and that's what ended up happening. So.
Has anybody asked for 1 here on the panel?
I ask.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that Rachel may feel differently, so I'm not going to speak for both of us, but as a woman and as a Canadian, you have so many strikes against you for being somebody who asks for things and for what they want. And so I find it's an instinct I have had to fight my whole career, and have become much better at it. And I think you do have to sometimes ask. In general, I don't find it's a huge problem anymore. Usually what I do is I usually ask my agent to find out what number of scripts are unspoken for, so that I know, is there something to even ask for? Yeah. In the example of Motive, I'll be really candid. I came into Motive. I'm coming in as a consulting producer, which is for their room right now, sort of mid-level in the room, and I knew it's around a 13. So I came in with 1 script guarantee, and I knew there were 2 unspoken for, and that they basically were saying there's a good chance we'll give her a second. So it was a kind of earn it situation, but at least I knew there was 1 to earn. And I made it really clear when I came in. I was really perky with Dennis. It's really funny. Dennis is so not perky, and I'm like his weird little alter ego. I'm like, even though we make a lot of the same dirty jokes, it's very weird. But I was like, I just want you to know I'm going to try and knock your socks off because I want that second script. And he was like, okay, well, let's see what happens. And so I made it clear that I was shooting for it, because I wanted him to know that I was going to work really hard for him and try and throw myself at the job, and I also wanted him to know he was going to have to turn down my perky little face, like in person, if he was going to say no. You're going to have to say no to me. So that was that case. And I've been working in kids comedies, these multicams that shoot in town, Mr. Young and Some Assembly Required, for several years. And in those cases, our showrunners pretty much always, you knew going in what you were going to get. Like, we negotiated up front, so it was no question. And I found that great, to come in knowing. I mean, usually there were one or two unspoken for, in case our junior person or our assistant, really showed a lot of merit, and they wanted to have room to be able to give somebody a little more than the minimum. But we usually kind of knew going in what it was going to be, and I found that a huge relief, because it doesn't actually create that environment of competition. So, I mean, if I'm lucky enough to have my own show one day, I think that's what I would do, is to be pretty transparent about who's going to be doing what, and hopefully everybody knows going in and is happy with what they're going to be doing, and so they're happy to be there. That would be my hope.
Do what she said.
Now, there's situations sometimes where you come into a writer's room, you don't have the guaranteed script, and the showrunner will pair you sometimes with another writer, and it's not the writer of your choice. And there are also situations where you will write a script, and the showrunner will completely rewrite that script and take your name off it. Have any of you had any experiences where you either were partnered with someone you couldn't work with and it was a struggle, or where you wrote a script and you felt you deserved the credit and someone else took the credit for it?
My first script on This Life was a co-write with the showrunner, Michael McLennan, and I just asked him if I could just write the whole draft and we could share the credit, because I wanted the chance to write as much as possible, and I knew he was going to rewrite it. I mean, some showrunners rewrite more, some rewrite less. Michael writes a lot, but he has the merit to do that because he's earned that right, and he's very talented. So I just wanted the chance to write the whole thing. So I wrote the whole first draft, and he rewrote the whole first draft, and then I wrote the whole second draft, and he rewrote it. But we have shared credit on the episode. So it was, for me, I was like, anything that I can do to get a chance to learn this and then see. I think him rewriting me was probably the most valuable experience that I could have had, because I got to see what he changed and what I was overwriting and what I was lacking. And then my other co-writes have been with Joe, who's the other showrunner. So I've been really lucky in writing with really talented showrunners. So I can't say I've had a bad one yet.
Ralph, have you been in that position where you had to co-write or anything like that? No?
No, I haven't. No, I've been lucky that I just write what I write, and then it gets changed anyway.
Abused you or punched you or hit you or anything?
No, you never did.
No.
You threatened to. But
I wanted to, though.
Yeah, no. I've always had things rewritten by, it's always changed, but that's just the nature of the beast. So
yeah,
I've luckily kept my name on them, though.
And Jennica?
I will say, and I mean, you're too modest to say this at this moment, but I'm sure this is, from your perspective as a showrunner, I mean, somebody's got to be steering the ship. Somebody's got to be maintaining the vision overall. And so, yeah, different people rewrite to different degrees, but I think most of us expect our showrunner to do that, to do at least their pass. Sometimes they just call it a voice pass, so that the whole season kind of hangs together through one, the filter of sort of one voice. So I think that's completely expected, and you should expect it. You should. I don't think there's any such thing as doing such a good, it's not a failure on your part if you go and get rewritten. That's going to happen, and if you can just embrace that, that's how this job works. At the very least, that that's the structure. I mean, if you write a feature, you might just get fired, and they might bring somebody else in and rewrite it, and you never know anything about it. They don't tell you anything that happened. At least this, with the showrunner, you've got a chance of understanding what is it that changed and why. One of the first script that I wrote that was on Shattered, the showrunner at the moment was Jeff King, really lovely and experienced and smart guy. And when I turned in my script to him, he said he sort of sat me down, and he was very gentle about it. He sort of said, "I just want you to know you did a really great job. I am going to rewrite it. I don't want you to think." He sort of gave me the pep talk, and I was like, "Oh, I know. I have no expectations or illusions about it going unchanged." It was so generous of him to be that thoughtful about it, but I knew full well that that the experience was partly the experience of doing it, and then it was going to be the experience of learning, what changed between what I did and where it went. And one of the senior writers on that staff really was given the task of, that also happens. It's not always the showrunner. Sometimes one of the more senior producers is given the task of, can you take this away and rewrite this? I want this changed. And in this case, that writer sat down with me and we did a few scenes together. He sort of, like line by line, he was like, here's why I'm going to change this. Here's why I'm going to change this. And that was also really generous. So that was Frank Borg, another senior guy in town.
That brings up a good point, because everyone comes into a writing room a bona fide writer in their own self, because you are your voice as a writer. But most shows want you to not be you. They want you to be the show. And I was just wondering if you guys have any, when you think of the job that way, when you have to be kind of bipolar in your creativity, you probably pick up a thing or two about what are the skill sets that you really do want to focus on as a writer when you not only prepare to work in a room, but when you're in a room, that not that remove you from the equation, but allow you to be part of a team, to share a voice, to be the voice of the show. Is there anything you guys can share with this group that going in would prevent some of the pitfalls of what you would do as a writer versus what the show wants you to do?
I find that if you can keep your weird and the things that make you different, but lose any agenda that you have, I've gone in with an agenda before and said, boy, it would be really cool if this episode could accomplish this thing that I feel very strongly about in life. And it never, ever, ever works. But if you keep the moments that make you different and that make you weird and that make you cool and interesting, and keep your experiences and how that informs your characters and how that informs what you're saying, those are the things that they hired you for. Those are the reasons they want you in that room. And it's hard to lose your agenda, because we write because we have an agenda. That's the whole purpose most of us do this, is to make sense of the stuff that we don't understand about the world. But when you're bringing that into somebody else's show, you're saying my agenda is more important than yours, and that's not going to help. So it's a fine balance, because you have to figure out what's intrinsically your voice and why you can speak to a character and speak to a moment without saying, and if the character doesn't do X, then it was all for naught, because that's not, it's just, they can do X, Y, or Z, and it's all going to be cool, and it still can have your voice. So,
Raul, can you talk about your experience because on Continuum, it was a situation where you had your own style, very distinctive style, and I was asking you to basically write a show that you might not have necessarily written on your own, but you had an episode to write. We tried to tailor it for your style, but
Yeah.
what was the experience like for you? And you can be blunt.
For Continuum, I think my position, initially when I started Continuum, here comes the dirt, was that I was coming in like, oh, okay, everyone's here, they're all above me, and I would say something, and they would get sort of poo-pooed and lost, and then the next day someone would say, hey, what about this? And I go, I said that yesterday, and now it's being included. And I thought, well, I got to stand up for myself. And then I started realizing halfway through the room, the reason why I'm there is because I've got a sort of an off-kilter look at things, and so it is my job to question things and challenge things, and not to try and break the series, but let's try and elevate it. So I'd say, like, why is that character doing that? If they've said this and that, then shouldn't, why? And so people go, wait a minute, why, we can't just do the lazy thing, because I'd keep on trying to push and probe. So when we did my episode was about challenge the morality of our lead character. I said, let's push her. How far can we push her? And I wanted to push her a lot further, because I thought, well, that's my job, not to sort of pussyfoot around and just go, well, I'll just do the safe network draft. I said, no, I'm being hired and been given this episode to take it down the dark path if possible. And then Simon's to go, no, man, you've gone, no, I've got to bring it back. And then so, and that's just, I just tried to play out that.
Okay. And Jennica, perspective on that?
I find it a really interesting question, a really great question, and I'm not totally sure I know how I'm not sure I consciously know how I try to do this. I think one of the huge benefits is if you can be on a show for that season's development time. Motive is a great example. I'm coming in on season 4. Everybody else in that room has been there longer and knows the voice of the characters better and the structure of the show better. And but what has helped has been just breaking story every day. We've been together since May, and we just started shooting. So we've been doing a lot of writing together. A lot of that is in the room breaking, and then some of that is going away and drafting a pitch document or an outline or whatever. And that has helped because I'm in the thick of it. I'm pitching ideas, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong for the show. But at the very least, I'm kind of getting the instant feedback. The one thing I would say is I think learning how to write for another show, I mean, it's not especially in fashion anymore to write spec episodes of TV as samples. A lot of showrunners prefer, maybe you can speak to this, a lot of showrunners would rather see an original pilot series or a pilot and a feature or something like that. And I understand why, and they usually are, a better sense of, can this person actually create something and break a story on their own and create a world and all those things. But I am actually glad I spent many years partly focused on writing spec episodes of TV because that is the training. That's the value of those, is that you are really trying to write the best episode you can of somebody else's show. And in the case of a spec episode of TV, that is an imaginary scenario. You are writing an imaginary version of, like the show that got me hired on a couple of things was a Weeds spec. So I wrote a spec episode of Weeds. And it was sort of a completely imaginary version of Weeds that became obsolete pretty quickly when the next season started because they went a different path than I went. But what it showed was I could, within somebody else's world, tell a story. And I think that it was great to have that practice. So, I mean, even if you don't find you use samples like that very much, I think it's worth doing, and maybe even worth doing a few of those before you tackle a pilot. Pilots are really difficult to write. Everything's on your shoulders in a pilot, and you're trying to make it a great episode of TV as well. Whereas a spec episode of TV, half the hard work has been done for you. A world has been created, fantastic characters have been created, and it's your job to play in that world and figure out how to structure a television story. And so, yeah, I would highly recommend, working at those, even if you don't find everybody asks for them as a writing sample.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. If you guys have some questions, I'm sure you do, we'll just open it up now. There's going to be mics on both sides, so if you raise your hand, the mic will come to you, and you can ask the question, as long as it doesn't involve Olympus and what happened.
Hello. Oh, is this on?
Go
Hi,
ahead.
Jennica.
Thank you.
It's Jessica. Hello. I have a question. Given all the sort of war stories that you were talking about and things like that, if you had like a magic wand and you could give a piece of advice to creators, to producers, and they had to follow whatever you told them, something that would make your lives, the writing room, easier, what would you want them to do, or what would you want to say to them?
Bring cake.
I mean, if it was to network, I'd tell network just to, be smarter. Most network people are idiots.
Wow. I'm really trying to think of a really good piece of advice, because so a piece of advice that would go to the showrunner, potentially?
To make the room's life better. Daylight, water.
My current office doesn't actually have a window, which is funny. I think probably it would be about communication and transparency. Like, kind of applies to almost any great workplace. The best managers, I think, of people have that good communication. And honestly, I felt that was what was going on at Shattered. There were multiple stakeholders, to use a phrase that you will know well, multiple stakeholders who were all very invested, and it almost felt like there was a flat hierarchy in terms, like, everybody had equal say, it seemed, between multiple production companies and network. And I don't think anybody was really being honest with one another, even in that small, high-level circle, with what they wanted. Because it became clear that a couple of our first showrunners that got fired, eventually one quit and then some got fired, it became clear that people were not on the same page at all. And I can tell you, since it's been long enough, really simply, the breakdown was, is this a show that has a protagonist, a key protagonist, and then some satellite characters, or is this an ensemble show? I mean, at the time, the conversations was, is this House or is this Homicide? Like, it's a big difference. It's like a worldview of the show, and people were not coming out and saying, I mean, the network did not come out and say, we don't like that you've made this an ensemble. We want it to be house. They just never said it. And months later, after weeks and weeks of developing a season arc, it became clear, oh, if you guys had said this 3 months ago, you would have saved a lot of money and time and heartache. And so I feel like communication is probably key. I mean, even for us in the room, if we understand, I am personally happier if my showrunner pulls me into an office and says, I want to give you a little feedback. I'm happy with that because then I feel like I know where I stand. When you go home wondering, am I doing a good job? Are people happy with my work? That is when, it fosters that weird, environment, and you get scared for your, you get scared and feel, it's all emotion spent poorly when you could be spent telling stories.
Great question. Next.
Hi. I know this is inside the writer's room, but I'm curious, how often is the writer, do you guys have any connection or say with the arts department, say the concept designers or the storyboard artists? And if so, do you have can you give an opinion about the visuals?
I can probably answer this. So usually that role as for the writer is left to the showrunner because the very, very early stage of the show usually involves a production designer's involvement with planning the show. So any concept art, any plans for the look of the show from a design perspective, from a look perspective, these are conversations that will happen around the same time the writer's room starts. But it's very general terms. But as the writers deliver material, once we start to recognize what the show needs from an artistic perspective, then those conversations start to get much more involved and the details become things that we lock into. So these guys and myself will be working on scripts and we'll start coming up with ideas that, let's say, a set needs to be built. As soon as we know in the room that we need this set, we'll start recording all the sets that we will need in the show for the whole season, all the locations we're going to need for the whole season, all the unique props, anything that's going to be something that we need to plan well in advance. That's when the art department will start to get involved. It's unusual. We did it on Continuum where we did invite key department heads, visual effects, art department, costumes. We invited them into the writer's room at the card stage, and we did a show and tell. So because Continuum needed so much advance prep because we had to build things that didn't exist, we would walk the art department and the key creatives through the season of TV. It was really helpful for them. Even though things changed, they changed a lot, at least they had a sense of like, oh, this is what this season is going to be. We don't have to wait for scripts. We can start planning locations, start planning sets, start planning props. Now, that was a huge advantage. Most shows don't do that. But with a show like Continuum or any show where you are, where the burden is to build a universe that doesn't exist, the sooner those people get involved, the better the show will be because you can, and even if the scripts change, they usually don't change enough that planning is thrown out. Although we did throw out a lot. I mean, you end up throwing out 20% of your show anyway because you always shoot usually 20% more than you can air. So sometimes it does get wasted, but you learn as you go to not do that. Hope that answers your question. Next one.
Hey guys. So I mean, you guys have worked with enough people now and enough writers' room experiences to think about the things that you would carry forward if you were showrunners one day. And I think everyone has an aspiration to have their own show. And to be a showrunner at some point down the line in their careers. What would you carry forward, given what you've learned and seen, and what wouldn't you take on in terms of how you would run a show?
Great question. Raul.
Well, I think as we're talking about, the whole transparency thing, I think is very important in communication. And yeah, right up off the bat, like, okay, here's my room of 5 people, and you'll get this episode, you do this episode, you do this episode, so that we're all working together. There's no secrets, there's no agendas. So yeah, that's what I would certainly do.
Rachel?
2 things I would say, and one is that same point, working with a showrunner who can say, this is great, this is working, and this isn't, so let's just get on with fixing it without, putting you down, but just moving forward and into your work and what needs to be done next, and just creating solutions to the problems. It's a really great thing because there's no, oh, well, it's great, it's all great, and then kind of taking it away and secretly working on it. Just like, let's talk about the problem and move forward. And then also, all the best showrunners have such great teams. Like, they surround themselves with people they want to work with, who work well with them, who get the vision of the show, and who want to support them in key roles, because it's such a huge job. It eats your life for the duration of writing and production. And if you don't have a great team, then you're just hooped. So I know on Continuum, that was probably one of the things that I noticed the most, was how supportive the team was of the show, and how if things needed to be delegated, they could be. And that was a model that I really respected. So that's something I'd want to carry forward.
Yeah, sort of shades of these thoughts. I definitely think trusting in your team. You hired great people for a reason. Let them run with it. Things can usually be fixed later, honestly, if you really hate some decision. So, let people run with it, because chances are you're still going to be reducing your own work and stress to some degree. So trusting in your people and having people involved and invested. I think I've been very lucky to throughout my career have various levels of responsibility, and got to have some responsibility fairly early, and it was really wonderful because it allowed me to get better at certain things faster. Like, I was pretty early on in Mr. Young and Some Assembly Required that I started getting the right to give notes on cuts, and the result was seeing early cuts of the episodes, which is a real privilege, I will admit, allowed me to write the show better and be and be more useful on the floor when we were giving feedback to actors and directors. So it was sort of like it paid off. I think the investment in me paid off, and I think I also, sort of a shade of something you said, Rachel, I've had some really wonderful showrunners who are really great at focusing on just what is the problem at hand and what can we do about it, as opposed to seeing something and thinking, that's not right, and now I'm upset that that's not right. Instead, focusing on, well, that's not right. Instead, can we have this? To really just focus on where are we going, as opposed to who's to blame for this mistake that's sitting in front of me. So that, I think, I really admire that in a person, and I think that's like the best kind of leader can do that, and I hope that I'll be able to do that if it's on my shoulders
We'll
one
let
day.
you know if you don't live up to it. Anybody else?
Feedback.
Next person. Go ahead.
Hi. Whoa, that was loud. So you guys have given some really great advice for us being in the writer's room, but I want to go back to the beginning of your careers when you were all starting out, because you did start out in very different ways. If you could give us one piece of advice to people who are trying to get into the room today, what would it be?
There's a really fine balance between getting to know people and asking people if they are interested in getting to know you, and pushing people. And I think, I feel just like I've been so fortunate to have people who've, sat down with me and had coffee with me, who've taken an interest in my career. I know some of them are here, and who've said, yeah, we want to hang out with you, but we're super busy right now, so it's going to be 6 months. And just sitting back and saying, okay, that's okay. But just the value of getting to know everybody that you possibly can who is involved in doing what you want to do is so, so important, because you will, like, when you get a rejection, you have somebody else to go ask, and turning that into, okay, this sucks, I got rejected, what's the next step? Who can I ask next? Who else can I set up a meeting with, and just being able to ask questions. I mean, a lot of the senior writers that I know have said that they're shocked at how few people actually approach them and ask to have coffee with them and ask for a script read. And then the ones that do sometimes don't want to take no for an answer. So you have to be willing to ask, and you have to be willing to hear no. And both of those things are really valuable, because you're going to continue to hear both for the rest of your career.
I'd say writing and networking. You just make sure you've got a body of work behind you, so that when you meet those people and you have an opportunity, that you can actually do something with it. Because I was teaching a course once on Writer's Room, and there was the student I had, he was great. He had lots of great ideas. And so I've actually brought him into Insomnia to sort of hang out for the day. And my agent said, well, is this kid good? And I said, yeah, he's great. And then so an opportunity came up for him, but he didn't have anything. He didn't have a script to sell himself with. So he missed out on that opportunity. So make sure that you are a writer.
Yeah, I mean, those are great pieces of advice, and I'll go back to my earlier thing and say apply for things. There are pockets of opportunities and money out there, and why not you? And I also say this all the time, but you have no idea how much being a nice, sane person helps. So for those of you who are not nice or sane, I'm really sorry, but no, it's incredible, especially in TV because it's so collaborative. You are going to spend, the hours are long sometimes, and when they say, oh, people always hire people they know, it's not because it's a fixed system. It's not rigged against you. It's that somebody, in like a Simon's position is trying to put together a group of people they're not going to want to kill in 2 weeks. It's like, who can I spend long hours in a room with and be a great mix and fit for the show, but also that I will enjoy my day. Life's too short to be. So I would say TV is not great for difficult geniuses. They don't last that long. Especially if you're going to do some kind of network show. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be, to get an HBO miniseries, great. But for everybody else, you kind of got to be able to be a team player, and so let that part of yourself be, nice and good and supportive of people.
Yeah, there's also a community of recommendations here. I think it's underrated. You can't meet everyone, and you certainly can't get to know someone in one meeting to say, I'm going to hire this person just because I had coffee with them. That's not realistic. What you can do, though, and I think a lot of people I've encountered lately who've had success have engaged with the filmmaking community in Vancouver on every level possible. They've PA'd, they've worked on sets, they've worked in post-production, they've interned, they've volunteered, they're part of the school system, whether it's UBC, VFS, or CAP. They basically are part of a group that they've already kind of proven themselves to be team players. So when someone like myself is looking for someone, even if it's at a junior position, a recommendation from someone who's actually been through a process, not just met them, but, oh yeah, I did a film with that guy or that girl and they were awesome, that means more to me than having coffee with you, because you've gone through weeks of process with someone, and then later if you say, oh, I really want to be a writer, that means that you've passed the first test, which is just do you love the business enough that you're willing to A, work for nothing, and B, get along to go along. And then later when you say, oh, I would really like to be a writer's assistant, you've already passed a very vital test that has nothing to do with writing. It's just got to do with, do you want to be in this, are you right for the business? Because not everyone here wants to work in a pharmaceutical company, right? And how many would agree they don't belong in a pharmaceutical company? Well, there's no difference from that to the film business. Some people just don't belong, and that's nothing wrong. It just is a fact. So I think if you take advantage of what's going on in Vancouver and you get to know people, people get to know you, things will happen. I mean, I hired a person in my company, Mohammed, who had no business being on the set of Continuum, but he just hung out. And because he wanted to watch and learn. And he showed up one day and he didn't leave for a year. And he never got paid. But you know what? And it was -5 degrees that day and you didn't have a coat. So, I mean, but that is the kind of dedication that you go, and internally we're like, that guy loves the business. He's going to stand around for literally months, come to the editing room, watch us work, expect nothing in return. Nothing. Except knowledge. I thought, who wouldn't want to have that asset? It doesn't make sense to not, make that guy a component of the business, because it's obviously his passion. Those are the kinds of things that make you stand out amongst the thousands of other people who want to be a part of the business. And it's true. I did it when I was 20. I was a security guard on a film set at night for free for a week. I got nothing except donuts in the morning, and I was terrible. I was a terrible security guard. but I just wanted to stand around people making movies. I didn't care. And that's the kind of thing that you want to see in the people you work with. You just, and everyone I've hired on Continuum has been as passionate, if not more passionate about film and TV as I am. And that makes me know, oh, I can work with that person. We have time for one more? One more.
Hey, so this question is probably a little more directed to Raul, since you've worked in animation. But I was wondering if you could speak to the differences in writing for an animation series versus a live action. Like, I imagine the budget offers more freedom, but is the process as a whole similar, or yeah?
Well, when I did Reboot and the other stuff, there was no room. You would sort of pitch your ideas to the producer, and say, this is what I think this episode should, I want to do an episode like this, and so you give them a bunch of pitches, and they go, yeah, we can do an episode like that, and we'll hire. We like 2 of these, so we'll do two. And then when you wrote, League of Super Evil was, they're 8 or 10 minutes long. I mean, they were short, and Reboot was the full half hour, so it was just. And then, of course, again, Reboot was very much similar because you had the characters the same, and you just had to go along. Because of the computer animation, like, you couldn't build to try to use the sets they have already. So that was very similar then to live action, when you can't just suddenly go, oh yeah, there's going to be this great animated battleship, and you go, what? We can't do that. So you still have budget restraints and everything like that. League of Super Evil was more flexible. You could come up with craziness because that was just the way the format would work. But other than that, I mean, still it's the same. You've got characters you got to work with. They had there was show bibles, to tell you the rules and what the do's and don'ts of the series, and you had to play by their rules.
Thanks. I hope you guys join me in thanking these guys for spending time here today. And sharing your wisdom. Thank you to VIFF Industry, and thank you everyone for showing up. Appreciate it. Thanks.